Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we've been having interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life since 2014. Yes, that's right, 10 years this year. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, recently known as Victoria, BC, Canada. This episode is going to be a very special one for all the listeners who live with chronic illness and all the listeners with Indigenous heritage. These stories and experiences are interwoven in my conversation today with Ojibwe medicine woman Asha Frost. Asha is a member of the Chippewas of Nawash First Nation. She's a longtime healer working with homeopathy, plant medicine, and ceremony. She's also the author of the best-selling book, You Are the Medicine, 13 Moons of Indigenous Wisdom, Ancestral Connection, and Animal Spirit Guidance. She's also the author of the Sacred Medicine Oracle Deck. It's really wonderful to be able to have real talk about living with chronic illness and also about how white supremacy and colonialism in the wellness industry and medical field intersect and overlap. We also speak in this conversation about the tension and the balance between accepting the reality of chronic illness while also reaching towards healing, which is like the perennial paradox of any health diagnosis, right? And throughout this conversation, Asha shares some of the medicines that can be helpful on this journey. So Asha, what identities do you lead with?
I lead with Anishinaabe Kwe. I'm Anishinaabe, and that's Anishinaabe woman. I am a mama and a healer, a medicine woman. I am an auntie and a friend and a sibling. And yeah, I also identify as a sensitive, empathic being.
You're also an author of the book, You Are the Medicine. You have an oracle deck as well. And in your book, you share about your health journey with your autoimmune disease. Tell us a little bit about what that is and how did you arrive at diagnosis? I know a lot of the listeners of this show are in that journey of trying to figure out what is it that's going on with them. And sometimes you kind of go down multiple paths or get multiple diagnoses and sometimes they don't even really fit. So tell us a little bit about all you had to go through to arrive at a diagnosis.
So at that time, I was in grade 11 in high school, and I had had symptoms since grade 6. I remember I'd had Raynaud's, which is a circulation thing in my finger, since grade 6. And I was having these flare-ups of pericarditis, so inflammation of my lung lining, and pleuritis and pericarditis in my heart. So I didn't know what was going on. And at that time, my sister had been diagnosed with discoid lupus, so lupus of the skin. And we had this project we had to do, and it was in biology, and it was about researching an illness. So I started researching discoid lupus, which led me down to systemic lupus. So I actually had quite an easy time diagnosing it because I'd done this research and this study. And then I was like, Raynaud's, check, pleuritis, check, pericarditis, check, fatigue, like all the things, hair loss. And I thought, that's so strange. But since my sister had had this discoid lupus, it made sense. And then I asked the doctor specifically to be tested for lupus, and it came back positive, plus all the markers of the physical things that had happened. It was quite an easy diagnosis in that respect. But of course, receiving it's not easy. So I was really scared. And at that time, they said, we can give you steroids and this anti-malarial drug, and that's your only option. And your markers are so high with a specific antibody, you probably won't be able to have children. So it felt very intense.
How old were you?
I was 17.
You were 17 by that time. Wow. That sounds really like painful and overwhelming to hear as a 17-year-old. How did you feel hearing that?
Yeah, I felt scared. I think I remember that planted an anxiety in my body it was like a panic. Am I going to live a long life? What does this mean? I wanted children. That was a vision I'd had since I was really young. So that was pretty sad to hear. And when I tried the medication for a short period of time. It was very intense and too much for my body. So it wasn't making me feel better. And that's really what woke me up to there has to be a different way. There has to be another way to heal. And that sent me on this huge journey of rediscovering my connection to plants and the earth and land and what had always lived within my bones and blood. It really was that just sent me on this journey of remembering and reclaiming.
And so, what were some of the medicines that have helped you most, and how has this impacted you as an adult? Like, you are a
Mhm.
woman of a certain age now. I'm not sure. We're
Mhm.
probably the same age. I'm
Mhm.
48. And so, and you have had children. So, how did this happen? It sounds kind of
Yes,
miraculous.
we are similar. I'm almost 47. I, yeah, goodness. Well, I went to see a naturopath at the time, and she used homeopathy. And it was sort of magical to me. I don't want to say it has energetic, components to it, but I had this remedy that was for shyness as a child. That's how my naturopath said. She said, "Is this for shyness as a child?" And I thought, "Oh my goodness, there's a remedy for that." But it also matched my hair loss, my panic, my fear, all of these things. So it matched me as a whole person, which I thought, oh, the doctors never asked me about this. They never asked me about how I was feeling emotionally around all of this diagnoses. And so I took that remedy and it improved my symptoms so much I couldn't discard it because it was these two little pellets. And I didn't know anything about homeopathy at the time, but I couldn't discard it because it made me feel that much better. And that led me, I was like, my world has been changed and I need to go in this direction. So homeopathy was truly the opening to that's energy mixed with land, plant medicine, or different medicines of the earth. And then, of course, I went to find different plant medicines, actual like herbal medicines that have been so helpful for restoring, renewing, supporting. I think for me, it's all about like what's going to nourish, what's going to support, what's going to hold me through these seasons of flare ups and through my life. So, remedies have helped me the most. And of course, there's different plants that I have relationships with, like nettle and dandelion and milk thistle. Just a lot of digestive things too to keep me well in that way. But there's been so many things in my life that have come forward that I feel like, oh my goodness, they've kept me here. They've kept me well. And then to have children, I remember when I wanted to start doing that, the doctor said no. And so then, of course, connection to my spiritual energy and energetic healers and connecting to the spirit world, that has been so vital to my healing.
What did the spirit world tell you that made you feel like, okay, there's no guarantees, but I'm
Mhm.
going to try?
Yeah, I had such a clear knowing that I was meant to leave a legacy for generations ahead. I had such a clear knowing that I was meant to have these children. It was like a vision. I kept having visions and I kept feeling my ancestors supporting me, saying, this is part of your creation story to have a legacy that is going to move through your actual body. Because we can leave legacies however we want. We don't necessarily have to do that through children. But I just felt in my body that I could do this. Like I just felt like it was a pathway. It's taken a lot of things, a lot of steps forward to actually trust myself. But I can say that I feel like I've really cultivated a sense of really deep internal trust with what my spirit is calling me to do and how my body is listening to that. And that takes a daily practice, of course, but it really came down to trust.
Mm. In my monthly subscription site, the Numinous Network, we have a group and a couple of meetings a month for people who struggle with their health, who have autoimmune disease. They have sensitive nervous systems. So we call it the Sensitive Systems and
Mm,
Long COVID Connection
mm,
group. And one of the themes that comes up again and again and again is, how do you soften and yield to a certain amount of acceptance of limits, or if not diagnosis, at least the reality that your body is giving you difficult information or you have actual limits. How do you balance that acceptance and yielding and being open to healing with the need to reach towards it, to effort, to have, desire to be better and try things and extend oneself? It also sounds like it's kind of related to trust, but it's a question that comes up so often. I would love to know how you balance those two things.
It has been really hard. I will say that. I think because I've been so immersed in the wellness world for a very long time. I started my private practice when I was 27. So it's been almost, yeah, gosh, 27, 37. Yeah, it's been almost 20 years, 20 years this year that I've been immersed in this wellness world, which has changed so much. But I was sucked in so much to um, that shaming mindset of if you are not healed, if you are not perfectly well, you have done something wrong. You are not following the celery juice cleanse enough. You are not doing this right enough. And I lived in that space for a very long time and probably even shared part of that. I probably was part of it. Until I wasn't, until it came really clear, like this is probably when I started unwinding my own marinating in white supremacy and colonization. I started unwinding that and seeing that the wellness field is so much rooted in that as well. And started to see that so clearly that I'd been shaming myself and blaming myself. So for a long time, I lived with as though I didn't have a chronic illness. I lived like, well, I'm tired because I didn't do the right cleanse, or I'm feeling this arthritic flare up because I must be acidic, whatever it is, whatever that diagnosis is. And I think I blamed and shamed myself for so long into thinking that I would push through the reality that I live in a body that has a chronic condition that needs to be tended to and cared for and rested deeply. So it's been a long journey to come home to that, to have compassion for myself. And the world will constantly pull us out of that, and we'll try to. So we have to be so conscious of the messaging we're getting outside of ourselves and check in with that sense of, do I have the capacity for this truly? And if not, can I be kind to myself that I don't? Because I'm dealing with layers and layers of sensitivity or, all of the things that we're dealing with as the people in your communities are working through, I'm sure, in different ways. So, as I'm sharing, I'm hearing myself say, I'm still on the journey. I wish that I could say that it's easy, but these systems are so strong. And my affinity to suck them into my body still, I haven't quite figured out a really good way to separate myself because I'm constantly unweaving, unwinding, moving through that healing.
Hmm. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking about white supremacy and what's just adjacent and conspiring with it is like a Christian supremacy and
Mm,
how closely the wellness world uh, tracks with capitalism as well. And so there's also like a psycho-spiritual shaming that, oh, well, it's because you feel angry and you're not forgiving, or because you're being too harsh with yourself. You have to say only positive statements, or the way you're thinking about those things is not quite right. And it reminds me so much of like a Christian prosperity gospel and this purity culture. So the white supremacy, the capitalism, even, fat phobia and patriarchy and those
mm,
things where it's like there's a certain kind of mythic white, blonde, skinny, mythic norm that signals I'm a good person. And then when we try to unhook from that, there can be also a lot of shame in not only how those things made you feel, but now that you're coming out of it, it's like, how have I not seen this? How have I participated in this with, and as a practitioner myself, I totally hear you where it's like, yeah, sometimes I did talk about, well, you could manifest or you could think a certain way, or, you're, yeah, it's even hard to think about. So in your book, you work with deer medicine on this
mm,
kind of shame. And you said the word rest, you describe having a healing situation where you said, if I don't rest, I'll die. But if I
mm,
rest, I'll die. Like we get caught up in these, sticky situations. Can you tell us a little bit more about how deer medicine can help us with the shame?
Hmm. So I believe deer as an animal spirit has come in with me with this journey of lupus because I know that I have been very hard on myself. I can continue to do that, and that inner critic can be very loud. I've tracked that and traced that back to that residential school voice that is in my DNA and that has been inherited. So it's harsh. So I've had to really sit with that harshness, especially when that culture has like pulled me into pushing and hustling through and being better and being perfect and whatever that it has called us to be. So deer medicine came to me early on, I think, in when I was connecting to animal spirits. And every time I would journey, deer would come and say, gentle, gentle, dear heart. Let's soften this. Let's soften this. So to me, that deer medicine comes in. It sounds so, I don't know. It comes in pink. It comes in this like beautiful pink, compassionate energy that flows through that I need to open up and meet. And sometimes I don't even know that that inner critic voice is loud, and then deer will shake me out of it if I take a moment to close my eyes and breathe, or I'm doing journeys with other circles or ceremonies. Deer often shows up and says, okay, let's weave through some of that harshness that has gathered up in your bones again, or that has gathered up in your waters, and let's weave this softness through. So deer says, you are enough as you are, as right now as you are. You don't have to prove your worthiness. Your value is not based on your productivity. Like just, really listen and soften all of those harsh things that sometimes make you hustle and push through what your body can do.
Hmm. It must be hard to carry that energy into a Western doctor's office. So,
Mhm.
this is another kind of balancing question. What are some of the considerations you carry with you as an Indigenous woman interfacing with white supremacist, Western patriarchal capitalist institutions, which the medical industry may not be as touched by capitalism here in Canada as it is in the US, but you still have that balance. How do you carry the softness and the medicine of deer while also protecting yourself from medical gaslighting?
Oh my goodness. Medical gaslighting has happened so much to me, and it's been recent. I actually thought about this the other day. I wonder if I've chosen more alternative ways of healing because I don't want to deal with that because it's so harmful. And I shared this in my book, in my Dear White Woman letter, that I had gone to the hospital when I had pneumonia. My son was only not even 2. I couldn't breathe. I was in really bad shape. And the first question they asked me, like they'd made me wait, and they said, how much have you had to drink today? And I was wearing mucklucks and probably some beaded earrings. And do you have a home? And it was just so blatant that it was crushing, but I was so sick, I couldn't even take it in until maybe even months later that, oh my goodness, they weren't caring for me because of whatever bias they held, whatever racist stereotype they were holding. And so that has landed pretty deep, and I've had to do a lot of work to try to feel safe in that system. And I wrote about this the other day, how now I think about what I wear to the doctor's office. Perhaps I make myself look a little more presentable. Perhaps I don't wear my beaded earrings or my moccasins or my mucklucks. I don't wear a jacket that has any sort of regalia or anything on it. I take my turquoise off. Just things that I just was doing so unconsciously. And then I realized, oh my gosh, that's why I don't want to be treated differently. So those are considerations that I make all the time. Holding myself with compassion for that feels really hard because the energy is so harmful. So I have to infuse a lot of deer for myself in those moments. And probably a lot of boundary, like a lot of bear too. That's courage and like standing my ground. And sometimes I think, why do I have to speak so loudly to be heard? Why do I have to exaggerate not exaggerate, just why do I have to be so loud about this? And why don't you believe me the first time? And I know that that's as people have shared this experience with me. Oh, I have that too. So I understand this is a shared experience for many people. And I think as Indigenous people, rooted in our bones and blood, sometimes we do have a little bit of a softer way, like about us. So some of us do. I remember my mom telling me when we should go up north and do work that Indigenous people had a hard time looking her in the eyes. Like that was a really hard thing to do. So even I imagine that in a doctor's office, looking down and not having that same maybe presentation as they're used to. And why aren't we listened to in that way?
Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing you say also is that it's not abandoning yourself to protect yourself.
Mhm.
Like there's known harm that's going to occur
Right.
here. And so it's okay to protect yourself. And especially you're going there because you're already physically vulnerable. You
Right.
don't need to add more emotional, mental, and spiritual layers onto that. It's okay to like go in a bit shielded up with bare
Mhm.
and a bit, like quietly, gently fierce in protecting yourself. I appreciated all the information in your book about the discovery of the unmarked graves of murdered children at the Kamloops residential school and also the other places across the continent. I imagine that
Mhm.
you must have been writing it when those discoveries were announced. Many listeners of the podcast know my friend and elder Norman Rataskett. He is of the Secwepemc Nation and he attended that school with his siblings.
Mhm.
And so he had been talking to me about buried children in the orchard for years before that announcement. And I know it has definitely impacted him in, again, this like not quite binary, but like in a very encompassing way, where on the one hand, he felt so validated and finally people would listen to his story. But on the other hand, it's so despairing because, again, he had to be sort of diminished and minimized for so many years. And I also know it was an opportunity to grieve in public with his people, but it also just amplified all the loss and the grief and the despair. What did you do to take care of your spirit when you heard that news and all the subsequent announcements that we continue to hear? How do you metabolize that?
It is a lot. I I think the hardest thing around that time was how shocked everyone was. Like everybody, we're so shocked. This is so disturbing. And it was like the big uproar. And I thought, we have been talking about, just like your friend, we've been talking about this for so long. Why are you not listening? It's a similar theme. Why are you not hearing? Why are you not listening? Are our voices not loud enough? Like, why are even our voices suppressed so low down that you have not even seen us, right? It's that oppression really, it just, I can feel it in my chest as I'm talking about it. That was really hard. The shock and oh my goodness, and it was beautiful at the same time because people finally started to see and listen and speak and hear. But why did it have to take so long? So I think I had a lot of anger that I had to move through and a lot of grief that I had to move through about that because we have known this. And I live the impact of residential school in my body and my life. And even though my grandparents are still, well, my grandmother's still alive, they lived and they came home. The impact is still devastating, the fracturing of our language and culture and how it was taken and extracted. All of that is still very, very present in our current society. So that shock was hard. And taking care of myself, I think I have to do it in little bits. It's like a titration. So I notice my system is telling me, oh, that's too much. That's too much. And now you're overwhelmed. And sometimes I push past that. And then I need to do my shaking, my forest walking, my salt bathing, whatever it is, because my system has been overwhelmed by it. So I've learned to titrate. At that time, it was impossible though, because it was everywhere. And I think that that's bringing in that conscious, intentional taking in of whatever's going on, right? But if it's going on in your body and your soul and your spirit and your bones at the same time as it's going on in the collective, it's a really hard journey. So, and at the time I was writing the book and we were in COVID, the pandemic, we were so shut down in Ontario too. And I tell people that in the States, because some of them were just living their best lives and we were just really locked down and people don't really like understand how locked down we were. So I think almost that oppression was even happening because I felt that lockdown even in my body. So I was having a lot of nightmares and a lot of visions at the time that were really intense that were bringing me back to that generational trauma. I remember that time being very hard. As things explode and open up and the truth is revealed, our bodies our bodies feel that. So my body was constantly shaking. It was like a shakeup of my body. Yeah, and thank you for asking a question because I don't think I've reflected on that since.
Mm. When you say your body was shaking, so another thing we do in the network is therapeutic tremoring. But
Mm.
whenever I look at particularly like the jingle dance, jingle dress, oh, sorry, I'm saying this wrong. The dance with
Yes, yes,
the bells. Yeah, jingle dress.
yes.
Yeah.
Staging a dress, yes.
Yeah, yeah. I think of how that must feel in the body. I just think,
Yeah.
oh, no wonder this is a medicinal ceremonial dance that expresses so many things. Did you find that like ceremony or even just this heightened public awareness, did that open up more conversations in your own family? Did it open up pathways for more ceremony and healing and cultural reclamation to kind of
Mm.
support that shakeup?
I think, I mean, in our home, I'm very truthful and honest about what's happened and the history my children know. So that was a continuation of all of that. And I think that what I have seen happen since then, which is so beautiful, is almost I do see reconciliation happening in our communities and people coming closer. I think there was a lot of turning away, ignoring before, and I do feel like that somehow brought us into a space where we can have a relational energy about it, or at least conversations about it. So I think that time was very important. Of course, the work continues, but what I notice now when I used to do events before that happened, now I'm being invited with so much more respect and reverence and honoring, and just an understanding. I can actually feel that heart understanding, trying to do the work in a way better way, and that has really shifted. I'm grateful for that, and I know we have a long way to go. And some people say they don't experience that, but I definitely have, especially in Canada. In the States, not so much, but in Canada, I have.
Oh, so interesting. That makes me wonder about your publisher. You're a Hay House author,
Mhm.
and Hay House, it has its big stars, and it is kind of a marketing machine. Like it has a lot of different things. It does um, books, decks, kits, events, like all kinds of things. Um, but how were they when you were like, I would like to weave residential schools and the legacy of that throughout this book?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think they had much of a choice because I was going to do that no matter what, but I received that book deal through a diverse wisdom contest. So they were trying to increase their diversity of their authors. So in a way, it was a blessing because with that commitment, then they have to be committed to what I was going to share and my voice sharing it in that way. And I was very clear that I wanted legends in there, would re-indigenize space. Those legends are the way that we grew up knowing about how creation interacts with one another. So I was pretty firm about what was going in there and what was going to be taken out. And I can honestly say my editor is incredible. And I think we're learning together. So I feel like we've danced together now through 3 projects. I can just speak so highly of her because she's learning as I am able to share my voice and about things that have been maybe problematic or an issue. She listens, and I'm very grateful for that. I can't speak to the bigger Hay House place and how they received that or how they thought that was going to go down. It might have been probably scary about really speaking about those things. They did say they were surprised at how well my book did. So that was interesting to me. Because I think at the time that does speak to the Canada US difference. In Canada, there was so much consciousness and awareness and speaking and hearing. None of that was happening at the States at the time. I won't say none, but not to the degree it was happening here. So, yeah, my book was at a time it came out in the world where it was people were talking about this. So I think that at the time, Hay House probably was like, oh, we're not in the culture of what's happening in Canada. So they didn't really understand, I don't think.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, Canada is such a smaller country comparatively. And
Mhm.
so I don't know how they could do a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in what's known as America. But I know it changed my life hearing the public testimony in 2012. Absolutely changed my life, absolutely changed how I move through the world. But we're still very much in the truth phase of
Mhm.
truth and reconciliation, as that summer really revealed to us. What have you noticed? Pardon me. What have you noticed about the increased public awareness of the truth in residential schools, um, and how that has that impacted, like, how your elders are able to show up differently? Has it impacted, like, it's just such a the magnitude of impact is just hard to comprehend. But I do wonder if now, a few years on, a little over a decade on from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission testimonies, have you noticed more elders able to step forward? Have you noticed intergenerational healing? What have you seen with the truth part just in Indigenous communities?
Yeah, that's such a big question. And I can only speak from my experience of what I see when I'm going into spaces and speaking. I think the biggest impact has been on my generation, to be honest. I think that um, when I think about my grandparents' generation, I think they were so colonized into Christianity and into the church and into those people going to take care and protect, that I think that's a really hard thing to decolonize from at that age. I just think it was really hard. So you'll hear some people say it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad what we experienced. Um, and I think that as part of the protection of that and even of their experience. So I can say that from my experience, I don't see a lot happening at that level necessarily. But the ones coming behind, I think that we had more capacity to handle it, maybe because we didn't go actually physically live in it. So we had more capacity to work through some of that on our own and then see the healing and do the generational healing. But I think that because our generation have that, the healing we're doing is moving forward and backwards. So that's the way I see it happening. And maybe you would talk to other elders and say, oh, it was such a huge impact to be validated and seen. And I think those people who got to speak and share, like, yes, 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 I'm sure huge ripples happen for them. Um, and I think that what I can see from my generation is us having now space to actually talk about it and be heard is so different and so impactful. I'm grateful we have the space now.
You have a mixed heritage family. You and your husband come from different backgrounds. And so your children, particularly at this moment, have some very potent, powerful generational shifts that they are living in with both of their identities. Would you be willing to share a little bit about the blended spiritualities and heritages in your own household?
Yeah, so my husband is Jewish, and I've actually converted to Judaism. My children identify as Jewish, Indigenous Jewish. And when we first met, we've been together for a long time, for 24 years. When we first met, and I was invited into like Seder or any of the dinners, I was blown away by the presence of spirit and ancestor medicine and the depth of that. Every single time we had that, it was a ceremony to me. And I was young at the time. I was only 23, so it wasn't like I was really doing this work as much as I'm doing it now. But I would feel chills and I'd have tears and I'd feel their ancestors come in. And his father or his grandfather was in the Holocaust, and he escaped the Holocaust. And when he was alive, he would tell us that story. And I would observe, I would listen because I had the capacity to listen. Everyone else in the family would just tell him to stop and be quiet because it would happen oftentimes when he'd be drinking and he'd share the truth of his heart. And I would notice everyone trying to shut it down because it was too painful to even feel or know. So living for the last 23 years or 24 years in these shared identities where we share similar sense of trauma in our bones, I think.
Mhm.
And I'm very aware of that with my children and what has risen for them, that it's a shared experience and they're carrying both, but they're carrying both medicines too. I have to remember that. And for a while, for those 40 weeks, that was in me too for a little bit. So I think about that, and the blessings that brings. And of course, right now in the collective, it's just heavy and there's so much to be speaking up on and sharing and educating ourselves about. So I'd say it's been a challenging time. My father-in-law just passed away as well. So that's just added to all of the complexity. Because when he was dying, I could see how that generational trauma was rising during that time. Ooh,
Mm,
yeah.
mm, mm. So tender, so tender. It's remarkable to think about um, what's happening in the Holy Lands right now and how your children are grappling with like being an embodiment of two different cultures trying to coexist. Like it just sounds like their medicines that they carry must be quite like they have a destiny.
Oh,
Do you
yeah. I
want to
think
share
that's true.
anything about the medicines they carry? What's your hope
Yeah.
for them?
I love that. And as you said that, I just feel like this coming together to heart because I share in my book how I struggle sometimes with how my true nature shows up in the world in these conversations. And um, I can only feel the beat of my heart and how I want to show up from that expression, holding everyone else's hearts at the highest expression too. That's what I hope. My children, my eldest is Prairie Man. That's his spirit name. And I feel like he's a healer. I feel like he has vision. He's very sensitive, very deeply feeling, and very, very kind. So I just feel he's going to be a healer, but that's just something that I've seen for him and felt with him. We had a very hard birth story. So I think that we're healing together as well. And then my littlest is Chief of the Good Road. And when I told him he was only 2, and he says, no, it's Chief of the Bad Road. So he's just like a little trickster and he's just so he is a chief. Like he is like I'm the boss. This is where we're going. I have the confidence to do the thing. So I think he's going to be like pushing the limits and pushing things through and just being like, I have the visionary and then I have the one that's going to like push the limits of breaking down systems of oppression. I really feel that so strongly. But they both have that kind heart. And that is something that I want to tend to for as long as I can.
And it sounds like they can work together to heal the activist and activate the healer.
That's so true. I love that so much. Yeah, I can see that. But I love even you presencing the medicines that they hold with this blend. It's sometimes I can get overwhelmed thinking, oh my goodness, that's so much trauma to heal through. Like that's sometimes where I go and I can forget about the medicine, but I can really feel that as you reflected that back to me. So thank you.
It's a wonderful field to inhabit with you. I can feel your heart and their brightness as spirits. So, what is on your path ahead? Where are you taking your work these days? I'm very curious to know what your medicine is evolving into and how you'll
Mm.
be expressing it in the next little while.
Yeah, so I have an animal spirit deck. It's called the Animal Elders Oracle. And I wanted to involve the elders because I feel like elders are forgotten in our society, except for Indigenous communities. We honor and respect them with so much reverence. And so many of us have been fractured from our elders, from our connection, our relationship. And so sometimes we have to look in different ways for that eldership. So my deck is about looking into the spirit world, to the animal spirit world for that eldership connection. And it's a gorgeous deck. I just went to print yesterday, so I'm really excited about it. It's a gorgeous deck, and it's something I've been wanting to do for the last 25 years. It's finally come into being.
When
And
is
I'm
it
writing
going to
it.
be available?
Oh, it's available December the 4th, but it's on pre-order right now, so you can get it. You can pre-order
Great.
it right now.
Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'll do that right after this.
Oh, yay. And then I want to write a book about the things we were talking about, um, you know, not feeling shame about your physical body and chronic illness and healing through and honoring the season that you're at, even if it's 2 years or 3 years. And, um, Yeah, just unwinding from everything that I've had to unwind from in walking with lupus through my life and connecting to that healing presence, I think, that seasons bring too, because we all go through different seasons in our lives. So it's still forming, but it's a chronic illness book or chronic illness energy book in some way. So
Oh my
yeah.
gosh, amazing. I know we're wrapping up, but well, you mentioned seasons, and on the podcast, we talk a lot about perimenopause and menopause.
Mm.
Have there been certain medicines that are coming forward for you, or maybe that have in the last few years that have been like, Asha, it's time to think about this change of life?
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. But I want to, it's not a plant because I've done lots of plants and lots of homeopathy, but really I'm paying attention to muscle building, like actually being like
Lift heavy
actually that
shit,
and then
man.
and then eating more protein. Like those two things
Yes.
are really speaking to me right now. So I joined this Pilates studio. I'm really proud of myself and I have to share this because I haven't committed to something for so long and I've been doing it like 3 or 4 times a week, building muscle and getting stronger. So that's really what's been speaking to me.
Oh my gosh, you're so inspiring to me because, yes, that's the thing that I'm focusing on too. And like, wow, eating enough protein is like a full-time job between that and fiber. Oh my goodness. It's,
I hear you. I hear you. We're doing it together.
yes, we're in it. So, okay, the last question on the podcast is always about grief and rage, and we have talked about it somewhat. But if you were to select maybe animals or plant medicines to give folks a sense of your go-tos for grief and for rage, for really any reason, what would you say?
Oh, I love that. Hmm. I think with grief, grief is a sound to me. So grief is a sound, and I hear it in my womb. I hear like the grandmothers and the aunties and those that went missing and their mothers and siblings crying. So if I'm tuning into grief, I actually will feel it there. So it is an expression, it's a sound. Yeah, an animal doesn't come for that. And rage, as soon as you said that, I just see fire. It's like, how can I allow the full fire to take up the most space inside of me so that it does not get stuck and I do not inflame myself? Because that, as many people know, it's just that self-attack. I want that fire to burst out of me. I want to be the fire.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Asha. We look forward to the next projects, and the Oracle deck will go to pre-order. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So wonderful. What a nourishing conversation. What a warm and bright spirit. I cannot wait for Asha's future works. I'll have links in the show notes to Asha's website and where to find her book, You Are the Medicine, and her Oracle deck. I highly recommend that in addition to the book, You Are the Medicine, I really encourage you to consider getting the audiobook version as well, like in addition, because she reads it and her voice is a balm for the nervous system. You'll find those links in the show notes of your podcast player, or if you're on a desktop, go to numinouspodcast.com. So my listener shout out today, I really want to thank folks who leave a review in their podcast player. Specifically, today I'm thanking Dub Candy, who left a 5-star review saying, Carmen is a masterful interviewer. She has a gift for going beneath the surface and uncovering the depths. The guests that she brings on keep challenging me to shift thought patterns and recreate understanding of the world and myself. Very nice, Dub Candy. Very reflective and contemplative. Thank you. I really appreciate you listening and especially appreciate that review. You can leave your review right in your podcast player, but you can also send me feedback at castfeedback.com/numinouspodcast. Like, truly, you can ask me a question, you can drop me a note, you can leave me a voicemail. Let me know how this episode landed for you at castfeedback.com/numinouspodcast. So if you listened to the last episode, I shared about the moral injury course coming soon to the Numinous Network. I really think that would be another excellent resource for folks who'd like some support to metabolize medical gaslighting. medical gaslighting is like a perfect example of moral injury, where something happens to you that violates your deeply held values or sense of self in a high stakes situation. And moral injury is one of those things that it inspires moral emotions like shame and guilt and outrage. And in the case of medical gaslighting, I think Asha articulated it so well. Like, why do I have to be so loud to be heard? Why do I have to protect myself from the very people and institutions that are supposed to be caring for me? It's that fury and despair and exasperation about that, which has nowhere to go in a capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist, patriarchal society, right? So the moral injury course can help you process and metabolize that. And we're starting it in the Numinous Network in June. The Numinous Network is also where we have our once or twice monthly gatherings for people with sensitive nervous systems and or long COVID. Find out more about the Numinous Network and sign up for my newsletter at carmenspaniola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.